Is it 2015, Doc? Are we in the future? It's a talking newspaper. No, actually, I am Dr. David Perrodin, and this is the weekly Fireside Chat for week 7 of Pupil Services Nondiscrimination, Viterbo University, La Crosse, Wisconsin. Record it live down here in the North Star recording studio, where it is a brisk 61 degrees today. So week 7 begins Monday, February 24th, 2020, and ends Sunday, March 1st. We're also going to be talking about a research module, which follows starting on March 2nd, and all of the great things we do here during our fireside chats. But I'm going to get off the paper and get back into the North Star recording studio. And here I am. All right. Excellent, excellent, excellent. And as we say, dun, 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 dun. Excellent. All right. So I wanted to give a few updates. One is I am aware that the FEMA course isn't working. The part of it that's not working is you are not able to, I'm going to just move this over here for the moment. There we go. You are not able to take the examination. So you can take the class, but you can't take the exam, then print off the PDF certificate, which I need to prove that you completed the course. But here's what I will do. As long as you've taken the course, email me, let me know, hey, I wasn't able to print off the PDF completion certificate. You will receive full credit. So don't worry about that. I just checked out the FEMA class online, and I thought I was able to get in and take the exam, but I wasn't. And then I noticed the little blurb that said, currently the exam feature isn't working. So something happened all of a sudden. And my thought is that FEMA will have that resolved pretty fast. But if for some reason they don't, not a problem. You're not going to lose points because that site was down for a little bit. So don't worry about that at all. It's also due February 29th. So you've got a little bit of time to get back in there and to check that out. So let's do the week 6 review. Week 6, school safety. Some points. Make sure that you're including your end users in school safety decisions and discussions. So if you're purchasing devices, safety apps, that students with disabilities, English language learners, are part of the process to try those things out ahead of time before you're making a purchase. Makes a lot of sense, but again, things get developed very rapidly in the school safety industry, and they typically don't go through a process of involving the end users, the people who are actually going to use these things. Also, be aware that states are starting to adopt legislation that circumvents building codes and ADA regulations for classroom doors. So this came up in Wisconsin with Senate Bill 44 or House Bill 44. It's in 5 other states, but you want to be vigilant of that because we need to advocate for students with disabilities. We need to advocate for preschool students, younger students, right? That a door is universal, that you pull down the handle or you turn the knob and you're able to get out. You don't have to do that. Press a button for 3 seconds or enter some code or whatever it is. So, this is very, I think, dangerous territory. And I also think it's very ethically challenging to promote these things in some states and say you can put these different barricade devices in your classrooms and effectively circumvent building codes and ADA. So I've got an entire presentation I'm giving to a professional organization that's based upon that. I am informed. I study policies, I study law, I work with people who write the building codes. So, I've got the firsthand information on that. But just so, again, you're aware, because things will be presented at your school. Maybe a PTO is going to purchase something, or even a parent. And as a member of the administrative team, you need to come forward and say, hey, how are the end users, how are students with disabilities included in this? Or what would this actually look like if we had it in one of our classrooms? So investigations, make sure that for bullying, harassment, threat to others, threat to self, you do not delay commencing the onset of an investigation, because key people are out of the building. Maybe, it's the principal, maybe it's a counselor, especially in small schools where the counselor might be in that school, maybe 3 days a week, or school psychologist maybe 2 days a week. Principal shares between a couple different buildings, but absolutely cannot have a structure that is dependent upon someone being in the building to commence one of these critical investigations, right? We can't say we're going to wait until Tuesday when the counselor is back from a conference before we investigate bullying, or we investigate a student who's engaged in self-harm, for example, cutting self. But these types of things happen. They happen. So you need to become aware of them, and then have your, chain of command or multiple people trained, or else, if something presents that you're calling over to another building in the district, another administrator, another counselor, having that person come over so you don't have a delay in starting these essential investigations. It's also flat out a liability for you, and it puts students at extreme risk, right? If we have urgent matters that might need intervention, or possibly even outside agency intervention, we just can't delay. Now that did appear in some of your posts where you'd say, here's the person who would typically do this, but then if they're not in the building, this is probably how it would go, but I'm not quite sure that this is how it would go, or like what my role would be in that. When do I get brought into this? So just having that discussion, making sure that we don't have a delay. I shared the DeForest scope and sequence document. So from kindergarten all the way through high school, at each grade level, different activities that are done, for example, bullying and harassment, education for, mental health, alcohol and other drugs, and so on. You can customize it out for your own district. That's a super valuable document to have, to customize out for your district, to bring out twice a year with your counselors or psychologist, and say, how are we informing this? Like, what are we doing at different levels, second grade versus seventh grade for, mental health? Well, second grade we do, whatever. It's seventh grade, here's a different approach program that we use. And the thing is, when you initially populate this, right, whenever I go somewhere and they want to do this, we'll find certain areas, pockets of strength where we cover this really well. And all of a sudden we get to a certain area and we have like 3 grade levels where we haven't addressed it at all. So that's just one of those things that we learn about. And then we say, how are we going to address these things at these grade levels? So we have continuity, that we know that we continually are addressing these things through different activities. So it's a helpful document. I will say that it is, when I consult, it's by far one of the most popular documents people want me to help them develop for their own district. And it's very efficient with a school board to show this, right? To say, here's what we do, K through 12. It's literally a couple pages. They can look, first grade, and we see how it carries over. Very effective with parents when they'll say to a district, you don't do enough about bullying, for example. There's not enough about bullying. There's not enough about harassment. You can bring this document out and say, well, yeah, actually, here's how we approach this at different grade levels. And then you can, you're always trying to inform this, right? You're saying we meet periodically, whether that be 2-3 times a year, to add new things to this. And if we have things that we're not doing anymore, that we take those things out. It's a fluid document, which also means like timestamp it, put the date, like last updated on it. it's always a good thing to do with all of your documents, last updated. But I think, again, it's really helpful. They'll serve you well in so many circumstances. We have the legal questions and answers document that I put out from attorney Joanne Harmon Curry. Now, that's not a current document, but it gives a great idea of how to generate questions ahead of time. Obviously, talk to your superintendent and say, hey, we have questions that we want to present to our school lawyer. And of course, we want to make sure we understand how much this will cost. And we prioritize our questions to 8 or 10. And then, you're working with your building principals, with teachers, and what are questions that frequently come up? For example, custodial parents. What's the role of custodial parents? How does it work with an IEP meeting, for example? Who can make decisions? What if it's about, parent-teacher conferences and all of these types of things? Are what you need a release for, what you don't need a release for. So, that I think is good to do, if not every year, every other year. And typically an attorney would give you a flat rate on that. It's the attorney that's working with your school. But then how I would do it is I would be present, and the principals would be there, and the counselors and psychologists. And basically the attorney would be going through these questions, which we've presented ahead of time, right? I've got these questions. I've helped prioritize them. And then the attorney is responding to those. So I think it's a great way to keep everybody informed right from the start. And these are the type of questions that will always come up during a year. And you're like, how did we handle that the last time? Or, and it's like, if you can standardize that out, if you can get that answered right away through start of year process, something like this, it's well worth it. So your learning teams. All right, your learning teams. Of the 4 teams, 2 approached Bruce's allergy as a 504, as that would be the primary means to address the plan. 1 team had an IEP and 1 had a health plan. So that's usually what happens. People take different approaches at this. And all of those positions were justified. Everybody did a solid job of saying, here's why we would do it this way. I wanted to point out that there are many books out there about food allergies and allergies in general. I wrote those down on your documents, and you can check with your librarian. And if you don't have them in your school library, the librarian can order them. But that's a terrific resource for the librarian to cover, to bring into your classroom. They're just children's books, but they're allergy themed. And PBIS videos about allergy education, allergy awareness. So, some of you gave me a lot of policy, a lot of documents, and I understand that. But, again, if we want people to understand, to be aware of allergies and students, especially kids, we're not going to inundate them with documents. We're going to use more materials like the books from the school library. And also be really careful when you have, a lengthy document and flowcharts with here's how it works for anaphylactic reaction and who we're going to call. You want to have some answers right up front, right? We want to know who's authorized to administer an EpiPen, which should be pretty broad, right? We don't want to try to search for the 2 people who are authorized to administer an EpiPen. That should be a pretty broad training. And we need to let people know we have your back. I mean, if these symptoms are appearing and they're rapidly manifesting, students having a hard time breathing, if you administer the EpiPen, obviously that puts a whole series of events in play. EMS is called, and, sometimes parents can be upset about that. Now we have to pay for, EMS if our child is transported. But, schools need to have the staff, they need to have their back. So as an administrator, you need to say, if you do this, I've got your back. You're acting in the best interest of the student. So also, excuse me, again, low humidity down here in the studio. Make sure that you are addressing any should language. So if your plan says we should be training kitchen staff about, use of an EpiPen, or we should be training whatever, the word should is automatically, when people hear should, it becomes optional. Should. I don't have to. I'm not mandated to do. I'm not required. It's an option. So you get rid of should, especially in instances like this of food allergy. Excuse me. Wow. All right. I'm going to do the rightful smart thing here. I'm going to drink coffee, which will further dehydrate me, but it also will keep me warm down here in the studio. Okay. So yeah, get rid of should language and replace it with must or will. And this is also, again, it's a legal liability. As an expert witness, I go through and everything that says should in policies, I'm highlighting out, because that is definitely something that the counsel I'm working with will argue to a judge. This should have been will, instead of the word should. I see this all the time in school safety litigation if it's, intruders in schools. For example, Parkland in 2018 with, Nicholas Cruz. So going back, page 346 of the, report on Parkland, the high school had 2 practices in place that were should practices. They should have been must practices. And one was teachers should lock their doors during instructional time. Teachers should have their keys on them so they can lock their doors. Neither of those things were happening on February 14th, 2018, the date of the attack of 17 students being killed, 17 people told being killed, 17 being injured. So again, should statements, as soon as you start writing those, as soon as you start seeing them, especially if it's, in the context of allergies and where we could have serious consequences of that, really look at that and say, is this appropriate to have should, or is it better to have must or will? Okay. Let's look ahead to week 7. All right. Week 7 is awareness and education. And we don't have a teaching annotation. We're kind of getting into the home stretch right now. So things are slowing down a little bit, not getting quite as much content as we went through here in the first few weeks. So we have discussion questions this week, but after this week, you don't have any more discussion questions. And actually, this is the final Fireside Chat for this course. So after this, you're going to be entering into your research module. Well, you'll be completing your final paper, talking to different people, informing that process. But yeah, discussion questions are done after week 7. Periodically check in. I might post some additional resources for you to look at in the research module, but there isn't going to be anything that you're going to have to respond to, questions after this week. I also put 2 articles for this week. The first is Your Best Defense. Just as an expert witness, things that educators should know. That was published by ASBO. And also an article, Investigate to an Absolute Conclusion. That was published this fall in Crisis Response Journal. An article that I think, and schools have contacted me, and how they've used the article is to make sure that when they investigate, so if they're investigating, bullying, harassment, whatever it might be, that they're trying to identify also what the root cause is versus the direct cause. So if you can get to the root cause, then hopefully you can stop these things from happening. Okay. So the articles, go through, discuss that in more detail, but those 2 are out there. We have the videos of Savannah, Dave, and Kevin. And, we've had great discussions. People saying, we have mixed feelings about this. Is it something where, it's being educational, we're bringing awareness, or are we centering too much on, these individuals because of their disabilities? So, I look at, and I think those, it's a terrific discussion to have. I think all of these are very informative videos that I would recommend using. And, so a friend of mine had abilities and disabilities education awareness day, had planned it out. This was about 10 years ago in a district. Special education director, worked with staff, worked with students. And it was really to celebrate and recognize that, we're all different, but, we have differences, we have similarities. And it was really well done. And it wasn't just people and students with disabilities. It could be, here's a really tall student, so here's what it's like for them to do some of these things. And it was interesting stuff. But of course, not everybody sees it that way. Some people are saying, well, okay, you had a wheelchair, and then students could sit in a wheelchair and kind of go through an obstacle course down a hallway and then come back. And the thought was to understand, how it is to go through a crowded hallway, right? And how it is difficult to maneuver a wheelchair. And probably be the first time for a lot of students or even staff that they've ever sat in a wheelchair. And then the counter position to that is, well, that really oversimplifies it, right? Because if you're in a wheelchair, you're in a wheelchair possibly for hours a day, and you have sores from being in a wheelchair, and you don't know what it's like to be outside when there's ice and all these other people in the hallway. So it's really not giving people an idea. If anything, it's simplifying it. It's giving them an idea that this is much easier. So, but of course, we always have people on both sides of when we talk about disability and ability awareness. That will always have two camps. Bottom line is, if you're doing these activities, you're including your end users, your students with disabilities, your staff, and all students. This was very inclusive. You're working in the best interest to encourage people to have discussions. Because we talked about it earlier in class, right? When people are unsure of something, any of us, we become apprehensive. And, we pull back a little bit. I'm not sure. I haven't seen anything like this. I'm going to wait it out a little bit. And that's I think how people feel sometimes during some of these events, some of these days. Like, I'm not used to this. I'm not going to try this out, or this feels uncomfortable, until they actually do it. They get engaged in it, and then it's like, oh, now, I've really learned something from this. So, but I wanted to, just wanted to share that I think those activities have a lot of value to them. Now, when I was in Reedsburg, I remember as a director of special education, I remember the Special Olympics team made it to the state tournament, and the high school did the same type of send-off for the team that they would do for any extracurricular team, basketball team, state forensics, whatever. Whole pep rally in the high school gym, fire truck outside, taking the bus to the city limits. And the thing was, it was just authentic, right? It was authentic. It wasn't like this token gesture that we will extend this to students who are in Special Olympics. Absolutely not. So, kudos to that culture in that district. And I'm sure that exists in other places. But for me, it really represented this philosophy of inclusive, celebration of all students. So that was really cool. Let's keep going here. So this week we also talked about incident command system, and you'll go through that. It'll be touched upon in that FEMA course. But the biggest part of incident command system, so it's this whole structure. Like, what if something goes wrong? What if your school needs to be evacuated because of a natural gas leak? I was an administrator when that happened. One of our elementary schools, we needed to evacuate. We did have maybe 20 students with significant disabilities in that environment. It was winter. We had to go to an off-site setting. So, how do you interface then with the emergency responders? Who's in charge? and who's in charge in your building, who grabs the go bags, the medication, and things like that. Because, I mean, you might have 60 seconds to get the stuff done. So I think that the main part of Instant Command System, I stress this, I wrote about it in School Affairs, is to know what it is, but not, you don't have to become an expert in every step of Instant Command System, right? You have to know someone's going to be in charge, figure out who that person is. Your superintendent, the building administrator, is going to identify who that is with the responders, and then it'll kind of fall out from there. But in the case where we evacuated the building because of the gas leak, there was then an EMS squad, which they asked, are there any students we need to specifically support? And we said, yes, we do have students who are medically fragile, and here they are. So they, went over and double checked, that the go bags, they did vitals on the students, and just, because obviously it's a traumatic event for students, to be coming out of this building and introduced into cold weather. Of course, jackets were thrown over them, but yeah, and that went really well. So, okay, this was really amazing. So, this is a journal, American Caving Accidents. This is 2017. It was released, and basically talks about, in 2017, different caving accidents across the United States. Caving being people going down and exploring caves. I have a friend who's a cave rescuer. He sent me this. He's also a fan of the podcast. But I wanted to touch on a few things, because there's an article, and I've asked to have permission to it. If I get it, then I'll share it in this class. But there was an article about debriefing. So it was called PTSD and Cave Rescue, Who Rescues the Rescuers? So we talked about it last week in this class of, the need to debrief staff after an incident. It could be, if we have a highly dysregulated student, maybe we have to do a room clear. If we have a lockdown situation in the school, whatever it could be, right? And the philosophy typically is, people will just bounce back. Kids will bounce back, staff will bounce back. And we don't do critical incident debriefing. It's just really not part of our school culture. So this was a fascinating article, because this was written by a veteran cave rescuer, and he talked about the toll that he experienced from these cave rescues. And of course the culture, right? The culture of, suck it up and just deal with it. And something that was very interesting that he shared in here was one of his coping mechanisms was he emailed after some, Sentinel event that he participated in. He would come home and he would email his dad what had happened and how he was feeling about it. But his dad had passed away 10 years earlier. So this email didn't go to any active account, but this was his way of processing through this, almost like journaling. And he felt then he was able to share this, communicate it in his mind with somebody else. And that was effective for him. And I had never heard of anybody doing that before. I've heard of people, journaling, of course, but nothing like this. So he also talked about triggers, where pretty soon smells, sounds, commercials on TV, things like that started to bring back memories, and actually he'd start to shake and start to become anxious. Now we think about that with some of the things that students are exposed to in the school setting if we don't debrief, and even trauma-informed, right? Things that students bring with them that they've been exposed to outside of school. And we really, we don't realize what might be a smell or a sound or a trigger, and it might not make any sense to us of oh my, why are they responding this way? Well, because it's raining outside, and last time it was raining outside, or a time it was raining outside, something like this happened, and these things are all connected. So it's all in that work when we try to figure out antecedents. But there was something here too where he said, even after 7 years of recognizing that sounds and smells and commercials, brought up anxiety. Said, I'm still working through that today. So that's something too. Something happens with our students. We don't debrief. Something happens with our staff that stays with them. And I was watching a documentary where people had gone through a traumatic event in a community. It was in Michigan, like 50 years ago, right? Some explosion in the community, and a lot of people came out to participate in rescue and saw some pretty graphic, gruesome stuff. And then, a day or two later, everyone's kind of back to work. And they went back and they were meeting and interviewing with people who had participated in this, again, like 50 years later. And people were saying, this was the first time I ever debriefed about this. Like, I feel validated that I was having these feelings I couldn't understand. And so, yeah, it's very important to think about critical incident debriefing. You can search it on the web. You can learn, more about it from what you find, but it's something, again, not inherent in schools. And it's something that we need to introduce, especially as Pupil Services Director. If you don't do this, also your nonviolent crisis intervention teams, they're going to burn out. You're going to have people asking to get off the team because they're always at this elevated like cortisol level. They're always on call. I mean, imagine, a firefighter without any breaks. I mean, you're just going after call after call after call. And people have told me they feel that way, and they've asked to be taken, off of teams. So, but anyway, I just thought this was an amazing article. And again, we can learn so much from other fields, pulling in information from other disciplines to help inform ourselves. And likewise, other disciplines can learn from educators. So I want to thank all of you. So I'm not going to do specific shout outs this week. I'm doing a shout out to everybody. Thank you for being active posters, for sharing a lot of resources, for sharing personal stories, to really build a context for people. That's been very helpful. If you have any questions when this class is done, don't hesitate to get a hold of me. I remember teaching this class maybe 5 years ago, and there was a first-year Pupil Services Director in a smaller district, and regretfully, 3 students completed suicide almost within weeks after this class completing. So in this small district, and that person, the whole district, of course, you're reeling, and that person contacted me and just said, I'm trying to work with our resources around us and other districts. And I know you talked about memorandums of understanding. We kind of have that, like it wasn't in place at the time. And so, yes, of course, we talked about that. I was able to help connect up with some other outside resources that they were able to bring in. But sometimes it's just useful to talk through some of that stuff. It's nothing where I got involved as a consultant or anything like that. It was just saying, hey, we covered this in class. We have a lot going on right now. Here's some of the things. What am I missing? And again, it was someone very new to that position, and some of those structural things, such as MOUs, hadn't been put in place at that point. Also, the book School of Errors: Rethinking School Safety in America, which we have right here. So, understanding the torus, self-similarity, getting kids to experience new things, making sure that we are having all of our students, especially students with disabilities, having access to unique experiences. Not that we believe we're, protecting them by exempting them from field trips or safety drills or whatever it is, or we're going to substitute out a virtual trip or something. But making sure we're challenging, we're giving academic rigor because, we can control quite a bit of that in a school setting, but once students exit a school setting, there's so much more that they need to interface with. And if, that's the first time they're interfacing with different caregivers and things like that, when they get out of school, we've really set them up for a hard transition. Also, hey, simulated annealing is talked about in the book, or that's basically, example is you have a flight from, here to Florida, and suddenly, it gets changed. So this isn't your flight, but okay, here are your options. You can fly from, here to Atlanta, and you can take like another flight from Atlanta to whatever, or you can pick up a bus, or you can pick up a car. I mean, basically, you have different options to get to an outcome. And it's the whole thing about divergent learning, that we're in this mode, convergent. Everybody tried to, be the same, but no, there's a lot of ways to demonstrate learning and still get to the same goal, still get to the same outcome. That's why, we rubrics in this class, rubric-based education, but allowing kids different ways to demonstrate things. And I think that's also a form of fighting against discriminatory practices that are more passive, right? Where we're typically requiring students to write out all of their answers and essays and whatever, versus allowing students to demonstrate other ways that they know the content. Also, thinking beyond surveys. How many times do we give surveys to staff, to students? And actually, surveys are really complicated to put together. There's something called constructs, kind of your main themes that come behind surveys, and how you need questions to inform the constructs. I always cringe when I go to a district and they'll say, oh, we'll put together a survey and we'll have it done in an hour and we'll get a result from you about, what students think about their school. Are you happy? Are you very happy? Whatever. We have to make sure we're not going overboard with surveys, and surveys just aren't accessible by students with disabilities. There's a lot of barriers. Terminology, is certainly, one of them, the register that they're written at, but having students with, focus groups is a good way to get information. You can use surveys, but if you use focus groups, then hopefully both of those will line up and you'll be able to have kind of a checks and balances. We need to be thoughtful of how we include, and that we include students with special needs in everything that we do in schools. So many times the decisions are made by the adults, and we're not including students. So I wrote an article about institutional review board in schools for school safety drills that has been accepted by Kaplan, Phi Delta Kaplan. It will be out in May, so unfortunately I'm not going to be able to share it in this class, but I will put it out on my Twitter. It's kind of my social media, but that's an article also, which helps schools consider how we're including end users right from the start, especially with school safety. So I'm going to just move this over here. And folks, Hey, I want to thank you for enrolling in this class. And, we cover a lot of information. And when it goes week by week, there's a lot you have to kind of scramble to download and to respond to. Then it's like, oh my goodness, another module opened up on another module. But right now, after week 7, then you have a long research module where you can take time, interview people, kind of churn through how you want to put together that final paper, and make sure the final paper is within the target range. Like, don't make it 15 pages. Whatever the top limit is on that, I don't know offhand. If it's 8 pages, it might be, but stick to that, right? Don't go longer than that. Otherwise, your learning team assignments have been returned to you. So if you log in to where it was submitted, even if you weren't the one that submitted it, it will, your learning team will appear there. The paper is graded, and then all the grades have been updated through week 5, I should say. And let me do this. Hey, we are close to the graduation ceremony for this class, not far away. And just so everybody knows, I am heading down to Disney Orlando with the family. I'll be leaving on March 16th. I'll be down there for a week. So I will be checking into this class, but I'm going to be hanging out with the mouse quite a bit. So, and that is during your research module, but I will be down in Disney. Just if you're trying to get a hold of me the week of March 16th through the 22nd, 23rd, I'm not going to be responding very quick to that. So you can text me, and there really shouldn't be anything, pressing, and I will check in to class, most certainly. But yes, it is going to be a fun time. I've been to Disney before, looking forward to heading back, and also the Flower Festival happening. Look at this. All right. Wow. Yeah, the Flower Festival happening at Epcot. So right now, when it's cold and super chilly outside and just all snowy, it is so nice to be walking in 70, 80 degree weather with flowers all around you. So any questions, please contact me. And otherwise, thank you so much for making this a wonderful class. Let's get through Module 7, Week 7 here, February 24th through March 1st, and then into your research module, and then infinity and beyond. All right, this is Dr. David Perrodin. Thank you, everybody.